Blog Talk Radio.
Hoor jy die magtige dreuning? Oor die veld kom dit wyd gesweef. Die lied van 'n volk se ontwaking, wat harte laat sidder en beef.
Ek smoeg vir die vrese waarmee ons moet lewe, vir guns en vir moord en vir ryp. Ek smoeg vir die bad news, vir Zuma en sy views, van ons op TV moet kyk. Ek wil nie meer hoor hoe ons tieners begrawe, oor niemand hul steur aan die wet. Ek wil nie meer lees van affirmative action op 'n klei om te hou wat ek het. Gee vir my 'n nuwe geit, 'n koers toe plesie en 'n tellery, wat lief kiesing en skryf en stry, oor die mooi van ons land en ons reg om hier te kan bly. Ek siek vir Malema, sy leuns en sy sê maar, ons hou maar ons mond en betaal. Ons kruip weg in kampe, word blind vir die rampe, en bid dat die Heer ons omhaal. Daar's Winnie Mandela, wat mense verbrand het, maar nou wil sy huil in haar hand. Die staatskas is leeg en die ANC jeug saai verwoesting en pyn deur ons land. Gee vir my 'n nuwe geit, 'n koers toe plesie en 'n tellery, wat lief kiesing en skryf en stry, oor die mooi van ons land en ons reg om hier te kan bly. Het betaal vir die grond, waar sy kinders kan bly. Maar sy huis en sy lande is nou in die hande van die vyand teen wie hy moes stry. Ons kinders verstaan nie, waar kom al vandaan nie, hul erfenis is uitgewis. Geen volkslied of vlag nie, en geen erewag nie, vir die helde wat daar nie meer is. Gee vir my 'n nuwe geit, 'n koers toe plesie en 'n tellery, wat lief kiesing en skryf en stry, oor die mooi van ons land en ons reg om hier te kan bly. Gee vir my 'n nuwe geit, 'n koers toe plesie en 'n tellery, wat lief kiesing en skryf en stry, oor die mooi van ons land en ons reg om hier te kan bly. En ons reg om hier te kan bly.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Radio Free South Africa on blogtalkradio.com and Resolution RDO Network. I'm your guest host, Gertjan Zwiggelaar. Our normal host, our wonderful host, our amazing host, Karin Smith, unfortunately could not attend to this program this evening and has asked me to step in for her, and I am very thrilled and honored to do so, that she trusts me enough to speak with you, her audience, people who are interested in South Africa and world events. And so, yes, Gertjan Zwiggelaar, I'm a Dutchman, born and raised in the Netherlands. I was born in Amsterdam, and so I do have a very significant genetic connection with the people, the white people, the Boers, the South Africans, the Afrikaners, the true people who are, in fact, Afrikaners, because they are the first people to actually coin that word, to call themselves that. And so for anyone to say that they're an African, those people, the descendants of those brave Boers who came down there and established their farms around Cape Town so many centuries ago, well, not that many centuries ago, 17th century is not that long ago. But at any rate, those people, those brave farmers that went down there seeking their fortune and indeed found it in South Africa, they are the true Africans, the Afrikaners. And so I do know something of the South African history, and therefore I do have a very warm place in my heart for South Africa and the white people there. I'm not so enamored of the English because I do recognize that the English are interlopers, and of course under their rapacious little dwarf inbred Queen Victoria, and of course the Judaic entity that pushed all of that, they did some horrible things in South Africa and stole what belonged to those descendants of Dutch people, the Hollanders, and that is the true story. So, anyway, my heart does go out to the white people of South Africa, and as well as my heart goes out to the Khoisan people, who are not Negroes and are truly indigenous to that southern region of South Africa. And we've spoken about that before. I have been a guest a couple of times on Karin's program last year and this year too. Wait a minute, was it last year? No, it was all this year, pardon. No, last year, that's right. Gee, I'm getting so confused. Here we are already, 2018. It's already middle of January. My gosh, where the time goes. Anyway, I thought that rather than repeat talking about the history of South Africa, I'm sure that you all know what that story is, and I'm sure you're all aware that events are unfolding down there that are not in the best interests of the white people. Indeed, the ANC communist government of thugs has instituted some regulations, policies, if you will, those being the rules of corporations, and the policy being, and it's spelled out in the Communist Manifesto, to seize private property. And so on the agenda is the seizure without recompense of the property of white people in South Africa. And so, I don't know, I haven't heard anything regarding further developments in that particular area, but I do have some of the latest news coming out of South Africa, breaking news, News 24, which is a online site, lots of headlines here. So I thought maybe, it'd be of interest to you, I'm sure. Well, it's got to be of interest to you. I mean, if you're interested in Radio Free South Africa, surely you're interested in the news coming from there. So I'll just go through the headlines for you, and hopefully that will be something you appreciate. So there's a suspect wanted in a shootout with police. He is in connection with an ATM and drop-safe bombings. This guy is under police guard in hospital after being hit in a shootout with police. There were 3 arrested after a Durban car chase shootout. Suspected robber was wounded in a shootout with KZN police, and 2 others were arrested, and a suspected kidnapper was wounded in a shootout with Limpopo police. Shootouts, bullets flying. I am aware, likely you are too, that murder rate in South Africa is likely the highest in the world. 50 or more people a day are murdered there, and lots of unfortunate white Boers are being tortured and murdered there. The numbers are huge, tens of thousands. It's really, really a horror story unfolding, and that's my concern regarding this the seizure of property laws, because I'm sure that's going to give some of those black people carte blanche with regard to furthering an international agenda to exterminate white people. This is the white people who are the descendants of Aryans or Caucasians, who has also been called. I think we likely could possibly be, those would be the white peoples, nor the European white peoples, that some of us, or maybe all of us, could very well be descendants of Atlanteans even. And there are some allegations, some research allegations that have suggested that Great Britain may be the last remnants, physical, geological remnants of what was once this massive island continent in the Atlantic Ocean. It's interesting that we still have words actually connected to Atlantis in use even today. The Atlas Mountains, for example, in northwestern Africa. The Atlas Mountains run through Morocco. Atlas was the king of Atlantis. In Mesoamerica, we have many references. One in particular comes to mind. Atitlan refers to Atlantis, the ocean itself, named after. So yeah, it's very interesting, this whole Atlantis story. So anyway, yeah, Great Britain and white people, the possible descendants. And of course, those would be, of course, the people that ended up down there and developed all that infrastructure in the cities and, running sewers and sidewalks and, brick buildings and, banks. Well, of course, with banks came the Jews, and of course the Jews have a heavy hand in South Africa, and indeed they are largely responsible for the unfolding circumstances there, especially since the time when traders handed over the government to that little traitor, that little murderous, little toady, Nelson Mandela, may his name live in infamy for eternity. Very interesting that at his official funeral, world leaders from around, like people from around the world, came there, and it is alleged that it was some sort of a gigantic, satanic, Luciferian ceremony of some kind, which, given the results of his involvement with leadership in South Africa and how things have de-evolved there to the circumstances that presently exist, it is really no wonder that such a celebration of his miserable life was basically celebrated by so many world leaders who we know, many of whom are involved with all that diabolical darkness. Headline, COSATU hopes freezing of assets commission is beginning of the end of the Gupta patronage network. Now, the Congress of South African Trade Unions, COSATU, says it hopes freezing the assets of Gupta-linked companies McKinsey and Trillion, combined with the Commission of Inquiry into state capture, would signify the beginning of the end of the Gupta patronage network that has wreaked havoc on our economy. Well, it is my suggestion that whatever havoc has been wreaked on the economy of South Africa, it is at the hands of the ANC leadership, more likely. Gupta companies, Gupta, that's an East Indian name, those people have been involved in South Africa for a very long time. Of course, East Indians are a percentage of the population in the Rainbow Nation, which is South Africa. It's interesting to note we were talking about that little cockroach, Nelson Mandela, and he became president of the ANC before he became president of South Africa. Well, it's interesting to note that since the ANC took over control, every president of the ANC eventually became president of the country, and so now we have a new individual who has been elected to that presidency of the ANC. Now, I am trying to find the man's name. I just had it up here a moment ago. Of course, you in South Africa listening to this, you know who I'm talking about. But anyway, this new individual apparently has quite a history of open let's say, expression of hatred for white people, and is completely on side of this entire agenda to genocide white people. His last name is Ramaphosa, and he is a tremendous danger, I think, to white South Africans. There were 8 Pollsmoor warders attacked with boiling water. So at a prison, inmates allegedly threw boiling water at 8 of the wardens who were searching for a cell phone. And so, apparently there's quite a bit of violence in the prisons there, which, of course, we know that is not so strange given that the majority of people in there are blacks, and blacks have a natural propensity to violence. And, of course, that's well revealed in a very, very awesome book that was published in 1868 called The Negroes in Negro Land, and by a man called Rowan Helper. You can find it on the Internet. It's available as a free PDF on the Internet, and it completely corroborates a lot of ideas that I've had about Negroes, and I'm sure that those of you living in South Africa amongst Negroes certainly will read that book and say, aha, yeah, I knew it all along. Well, look at that. They've been like that all along. Anyway, so much for Yak for now. I think we'll take a wee little break. And since I am also a composer of serious music, I would like to present to you a piece of music I composed in 2016, which is called I So Love the Harp.
To the Ayatollahs of Iran and every terrorist you enable, listen up. You might have met our fresh-faced flower child president and his weak-kneed Ivy League friends, but you haven't met America. You haven't met the heartland, where the people will defend this nation with their bloody, calloused, bare hands, if that's what it takes. You haven't met the steel workers and the hard rock miners or the swamp folks in Cajun country who can wrestle a full-grown gator out of the water. You haven't met the farmers, the cowboys, the loggers, and the truck drivers. You don't know the mountain men who live off the land or the brave cops who fight the good fight in the urban war zones. No, you've never met America, and you ought to pray you never do. I'm the National Rifle Association of America, and I'm freedom's safest place.
Is your child's school not lining up with your family values? Consider Freedom Project Academy, a fully accredited Judeo-Christian live online school for kindergarten through high school. Freedom Project Academy provides live online classes, 24/7 access to recordings, assignments, grades, and even tutoring. Take a look at Freedom Project Academy online and request your free information packet today. Freedom Project Academy, a Judeo-Christian online school.
Yes, so there you had some advertising and a little bit of music. And here I am back, your host, Gertjan Zwiggelaar, on Radio Free South Africa on the Resolution RDO network. So I was poking through the clips that are available to me to use on this program. And since I do not claim to be an expert on South Africa, I mean, I do have some awareness, but, I am not a South Africa scholar by any means. I have written some articles in support of what King Kuibaha Cornelius III and the Khoisan people are trying to achieve in South Africa, seceding from the ANC-controlled northern part and having, in fact, very legitimate land claims. And according to the United Nations rules regarding, indigenous peoples' rights to self-determination, the claims to the land are completely legitimate, since the Khoisan people were, in fact, the indigenous people of that region. And again, I repeat, they are not the same as the interloping blacks that drifted down from the north and who are now claiming the land in South Africa. With, of course, the complete agreement of the ANC government. In fact, it's a policy being pushed by that government. So, at any rate, I was poking through these clips, and I came upon a clip by a man called Dan Roth. And he has the title of this clip is The South African Crisis in World Perspective. And since I am very curious what he has to say, now I'm not sure whether you, having listened to Radio Free South Africa, may have heard this before or not, but at any rate, it likely bears repeating. And so it is a almost 41-minute clip. And so I'm going to proceed that with a couple of more advertisements, so you realize that this radio program, in fact, any of these radio programs on alternate news sites like this, blogtalkradio.com and resolutionrdo.com, and it all costs money, and so, we do have advertisers, and they expect their messages to be shared. And so I'm going to share a few more messages with you, and then I will launch into that clip with Dan Roth.
Attention patriots, tired of the tyranny and crime in the sanctuary cities? Flee the city and seek refuge in the American Redoubt. FleeTheCity.com. Move to the freedom of Idaho, Montana, or Wyoming. FleeTheCity.com. FleeTheCity.com.
We the people do hereby request the immediate assistance of President Trump, Congress, media outlets, and freedom organizations to defend all innocent Americans. There is no liberty with innocents in prison. Please sign our petition, thefreedomcoalition.com.
I am really worried about our retirement funds.
Me too. We've already lost so much value in the recession and the ups and downs of the stock market. I'm afraid we're not going to have enough for retirement.
I talked to Jim next door, and he told me they just set up a new kind of IRA with a gold-silver group. He said it's simple and safe. It's a private storage IRA, and we could have real gold and silver in our hands.
You mean we can actually see it and touch it?
Yes. Jim says we could have all the benefits of an IRA to help build our retirement. And bottom line, we would own a real tangible asset. What do you think?
I think we need to find out how to get our own private storage IRA. Let's call Gold Silver Group now.
Worried about your future? Call 800-474-9427 now to find out how easy and safe it is to set up a private storage IRA with Gold Silver Group. All our transactions are privately delivered, fully insured, and quality guaranteed. You could qualify for up to $700 in free silver. Call Gold Silver Group now. 800-474-9427.
All right, good sound advice. Gold, silver. I recommend bullion, gold, and silver. It's always a good investment. I mean, it does fluctuate, but overall, gold and silver have kept their value traditionally. In fact, if you think about it, an ounce of gold back in the Middle Ages could buy, a complete beautiful set of high-quality clothing. Well, same thing today. You can go into a haberdasher if they accept gold, and you go in there with an ounce coin, or say an ounce bar of gold, the bullion gold, and I don't know, I haven't looked at what the price of gold is, but let's assume it's around $1,500 an ounce. You can buy a pretty decent set of clothing for $1,500, a suit, shirt, tie, maybe even a pair of shoes. So anyway, here is this clip, 40 minutes, 41 seconds, by Dan Roth, The South African Crisis in World Perspective.
Our next speaker, Dan Root, speaks from a perspective that will be ours if we do nothing. That is to say, Dan Root is from South Africa, so he is a white minority living under black rule. Dan Root is the director of the Pro-Afrikaans Action Group, which he founded in the year 2000, which regularly attacks the excesses of the ruling regime, and it also sets up small businesses for whites who, because of the current racial policies in South Africa, are almost completely shut out of employment in major institutions. Mr. Root is a real voice of sanity in the South African media. He has a Twitter following of nearly 40,000. And his most recent book is called Raiders of the Lost Empire. It's about the artificial identity that South African is trying to establish today. It's for sale in the back of the room. And today, Mr. Root will speak to us about the South African crisis in world perspective. Dan Root.
Yes, thank you, Jared, and everybody at American Renaissance for your kind invitation. And I also want to thank the U.S. government for finally, okaying my visa application, because upon first applying for it, I was confronted with one of your darker compatriots as an official. And after learning that I was on my way to the American Renaissance Conference, he promptly refused my U.S. visa. And I was very disappointed, and it took quite a few weeks before this decision was reversed. And in the meantime, I'd actually sent an email to Jared Taylor saying that I might come on a Mexican visa, because I'd worked out that I could actually fly to Monterrey in North Mexico and buy a second-hand mountain bike and then cross the Rio Grande by mountain bike up to San Antonio, and it would have taken me 300 miles in cycling, and it would have been very good exercise. But unfortunately, and now I'm spoiling myself on your marvelous southern cooking here at breakfast every day, and I'm not getting the exercise I need. But that's perhaps not such an important point at this moment. Yes. Now, when I listen to most of these stories today, we are, as we say, ahead of the curve in South Africa. We are already a minority, a powerless minority in our own country. In fact, there's a Dutch politician, Mr. Martin Bosma, who's written a book, and it was published last year, about us, with precisely that title, Afrikaners zijn, that we are a powerless minority in our own country. And he also famously said, and this is from a Dutch newspaper, that Afrikaners are the canaries in the coal mine. And most of you are familiar with the role of a canary in a coal mine. When there are dangerous gases for humans, the canary that they take along in a cage will die first. And when the canary dies, the rest will know, the miners will know that there are these gases present in the coal mine. So we, according to Mr. Bosma, are the canaries in the coal mine, and we would be the first Western nation to become extinct in the modern history of the West. Okay, that's Martin Bosma's book there, Minderheid in Eigen Land. And in fact, Jared Taylor used a Dutch phrase earlier on with that exact same word, Eigen Volk eerst, he said. And the subtitle there is how the progressive struggle degenerated into genocide and ANC apartheid. Now, most of you are familiar with this pejorative term, apartheid, and there's a famous definition by the UN of it as well. But in fact, if you look at that UN definition, it fits the current government of South Africa more than it did any of our governments in the past, because the UN says apartheid is destroying a race or a culture or a people, and that's exactly what is being done to us currently in our own country, where we are a minority. This is the quote from the book by Martin Bosma, where he says, "The Afrikaners function as the guinea pig in the multicultural laboratory. It is the first Western nation undergoing what the multiculturalists propose, to become a minority and give up power. The canaries in the coal mine. We may ask ourselves, is that scenario to be recommended? Should Dutch people get themselves into the same position as Afrikaners in South Africa? Should we also fall for the multicultural call for diversity and reconciliation? The author Milan Kundera wrote, 'A man knows that he is mortal, but he always assumes that his nation has eternal life.'" And, well, as we've seen from Jared Taylor's talk and some of the others we've heard this morning, that, once given the lamentable state of the multicultural experiment currently in the West, it's going to become even worse when you actually lose power yourselves, when you become a demographic minority in your country. And there are very close similarities between our decline and yours, with the main difference that your decline is still gradual. It is still a few decades in the future. But ours was, to put it bluntly, sudden and brutal. It reminded me, when I was young, or even as a child, America was for me a very distant place. But I did read a few American books, and one of my most cherished possessions is the short stories of Edgar Allan Poe, in an edition that I got from my father. And you probably know that story, that strange, the facts in the case of Monsieur Valdemar. And it's a kind of metaphor for me what happened to us. In the case of Mr. Valdemar, he gets hypnotized on his deathbed. And then 7 months later, the hypnotist tries to reawaken him to see if he might not live. But in fact, in a few seconds, his body goes through the degeneration that it would have gone through in 7 months. And that's the rather macabre description that Edgar Allan Poe gives of Monsieur Valdemar. And we, since 1994, has gone through such a process of degeneration and decline that one could compare it almost to the rotting away of a corpse. I could tell you very many stories about everything that's wrong in South Africa today, but as this graph of our currency, I think, puts it all into perspective. As you can see here, around up until about 1984 or thereabouts, when the anti-apartheid movement really started gaining momentum, until today, our currency has lost about 90 to 95% of its value. In fact, since my last appearance at American Renaissance in 2011, it's lost 50% of its value. So even though the media are trying to sell the South African story as a good story, the markets are not convinced, and the investors are not convinced, and that is the result. In 1974, $1 was only 66 of our South African cents, and $1 currently is worth 15 Rand 40. There's another graph about the decline. That's another theme that we've heard today, is the demographic decline of Westerners and white people generally in the world. And this is a graph from The Economist, the British Economist, where they show that the blue section there is the white population of South Africa, and how it's grown slowly over the years since about 1910, and the black portions on this graph shows you how the black population has grown. So we've, since 1960, gone from 20% of the overall population to currently below 10. And there are even some very pessimistic predictions that say in the year 2030, we'll only be 1 or 2% of the total population of South Africa. But I'm inclined to think that those are a bit on the pessimistic side, but it's definitely the case that we are waning away as a percentage of the total population. These are the same kind of figures presented of the white population since 1904, when we were 1.1 million. 2015, we are 4.5 million. Our fertility rate is also very low. It's below the replacement value. Peter Brimelow also in his talk referred to that's a major problem among European peoples worldwide. The Afrikaner fertility rate is slightly higher than the other white people in South Africa, the English speakers, the Portuguese, and Greeks and others. But it's still not high enough to really be sustainable in the long term. Interestingly, even though those of you who have read my recent article, or I think it was last year in the AmRen magazine or online, about the war on the Afrikaans language, despite that, there's a marginal increase in the number of Afrikaans speakers among white people. We're now 60.8%, and the English speakers have declined to 35.9%, as you can see there. So they're only 35.9% now of the total white population as a result of their very negative birth rate. Now, what's really astonishing about South Africa's fall from grace, as I would call it, is the fact that at one point we were an integral part of the whole Western system. We fought on the side of the Allies in both world wars. We had a very famous prime minister called Jan Smuts. In 1942, during World War II, he became the first Empire statesman, so-called, to address both Houses of Parliament in London to thunderous applause. You can actually go and see that. There's a YouTube video of that, where the entire British political class applauds him, and where Churchill invites them all to give him a standing ovation, and they sing "He's a Jolly Good Fellow" to them. That was in 1942, and only a few years later, a few decades later, we were the so-called pariah of the world. People were boycotting us, they wouldn't play sport against us, They even spat on our diplomats in Western capitals. This is a picture taken quite recently, earlier this year, a bust of Smuts defaced at the University of Cape Town. You've got the same types of problems on your campuses where statues of former white heroes or Confederate heroes are also defaced by these so-called protesters. That's another monument to our participation in the 2 world wars. I wouldn't read the inscription there. I'm sorry to expose you to that, but it gives you it gives you a good impression of the sort of hostility that we've got against white people currently in South Africa, defacing memorials like that. This is another picture of Churchill, all the leaders from the Second World War. There's Eisenhower, Churchill, and Smuts, and including the Canadian and Australian leaders inspecting the troops during the war. So what are the main reasons, in summary, for our decline? Was first our demographic marginalization as a result of the black and the colored population explosion. Our so-called colored population, the mixed race population, they went from below 1 million to currently about 5 million people since 1960. And then there was this great ideological change in the world that people call political correctness, cultural Marxism, progressivism, or anti-white racism. And that triggered this immense hostility towards us in the world. And as a result of that propaganda onslaught, we finally lost power in our own country. And those same factors are at work to bring down the entire Western civilization. Demographic decline, as well as the demoralizing influence of political correctness. And of course, we were betrayed by our own leaders, just like Mrs. Merkel betrayed Germany by welcoming all these Islamic refugees into her own country. And, I mean, there are other statements by Bill Clinton, Nicolas Sarkozy, and others where they openly declare that it's going to be a good thing for whites to become minorities in their own countries, just like we are at the moment. So it's a David versus Goliath struggle that we are currently up against in South Africa. There are 4.5 million whites. We are still treated in a hostile fashion by the world media. We've got about 50 million people of color, so-called, who are constantly being brainwashed into the evils of white racism, white privilege, and so on. We've also got a very ultra-liberal set of media. And around us, there are Afro-Marxist states who are openly socialist, openly anti-white, such as Mr. Mugabe of Zimbabwe, but also many of the other countries in the region are equally anti-white and radical. There's also a new anti-racism law in South Africa that they are contemplating, and it's going to be a criminal offense to say or do anything deemed to be racist. So hate speech, so-called, will in itself become a hate crime. This is almost like something from George Orwell's novel 1984, where there were thought crime and speech crime. So you're going to commit a speech crime in South Africa, and they could actually get very nasty with you. There's also a national plan, so-called, against racism. I won't go into all the details of that, but those are some of the definitions being used, such as a hate crimes, acts motivated by bias based on the identity with reference to race, religion, and national origin, sexual orientation, gender, or gender identity of the victim. Except somehow these things don't apply to whites. I mean, if you're anti-white, or that doesn't count as racism or as a hate crime. Over the past week or two ever since the beginning of the year, every week there has been a racism scandal in South Africa, and the media go completely berserk in reporting on these things. A week or two ago, there was a High Court judge in Pretoria, Mabel Jansen, who stated that there was she had about 50 cases in her own court of black men raping children. And she said that this was such a phenomenon, and she thinks there were cultural reasons behind this. Immediately, she was attacked by a so-called social justice warrior, one Gillian Schutte, and she's on her way to being the first judge in the history of South Africa to be impeached as a result of something she stated in a private message on Facebook about the nature of black perpetrators. This is now the social justice warrior. You've also got a lot of them here in the USA. Her name is Gillian Schutte. Her married name is Singizwa. And this is Mr. Singizwa and their child. And she's got such an obsession over her own step into miscegenation, or whatever you might want to call it, that she is constantly raging against all the whites in the country and seeking out those whites who dare to stray a few millimeters, from the straight and narrow path of anti-racism. So we are becoming a kind of anti-racist Soviet Union, where whites will be persecuted for not towing the line and for making or even thinking the unthinkable. Some of the stuff that Jared Taylor said today, I think if he had to say it in South Africa, he would also be possibly charged with a misdemeanor, or it could soon be a felony in your terms. So US political correctness is amplified and intensified in South Africa. Then there's a strange case of Mr. Andre van Deventer. He actually called they're talking there about the K word. Now you have in the US the N word, whereas we've got the K word. There's an Arab word for an unbeliever is a kafir. And in South Africa, that's the sort of pejorative word that people use for black people, and it's been like that for years. And apparently Mr. van Deventer called his girlfriend's domestic servant a kafir. And he was first fined with 50,000 rand and 2 years of house arrest. Then when he didn't, according to the magistrate concerned, he didn't follow her, her court order to the letter, he was sent to jail for 2 years, for using the word kafir. Here in America, we're protected by the First Amendment, so I can say it here on stage, but probably not in South Africa. So our struggle in South Africa is part of the global struggle that we've been talking about today. In 1980, few people understood what we were up against, except perhaps the American South, the Belgians who were driven out of the Congo, the Portuguese who were driven out of Angola and Mozambique, the Rhodesians, and some Frenchmen, because the French also had various colonies in Africa, and they had some experience of the cultural differences between whites and blacks. But thanks to the immigration crisis in Europe today, which is very unfortunate for them, but in a way it's unfortunate for us because now suddenly people understand, they've got a greater experience and understanding of what we are confronted with. And there's a nice term in German, Kulturkampf, which is, I think Huntington translated that into his Clash of Civilizations. And this is actually Huntington's own map of the various civilizations in the world. And there's sub-Saharan Africa, there where we live. The west is sort of the light blue or purple there. And then you've got the Russian Empire over there, and then the cynic one, as he calls it. And the thing is that I don't think Africans have the power or the ability to actually dominate South Africa in years to come. We're already seeing an influx of Pakistanis into our country and Chinese and so on. And eventually our country will be dominated either by the Chinese or by the Indians. And that way the Western world is shrinking all the time, and some of these other civilizations are taking positions, they are taking strategic positions, and South Africa is already an anti-Western country, but in the future it might even become more of an anti-Western country, aimed with all its naval bases and so on being used against the West itself. You all know about the domino theory. General Charles de Gaulle of France thought South Africa of strategic importance to the West, and he said that France should always protect it. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. And each domino that falls on that map of the clash of civilizations is a negative for our civilization. And that's one very good reason to try and save what is left of South Africa. This is a picture of our old Air Force, some of our planes. When the ANC and South African Communist Party took over, they simply sold off all those planes everywhere for cash. And a lot of middlemen made a lot of money out of that. But it's gone. Our Air Force is gone. And we were once voted the most professional Air Force in the world by a group of pilots meeting here in the United States. I mean, this is a very old map from colonial times, but it shows you, I wanted to show you how these dominoes fell. You know, we were surrounded by friendly countries, the two Portuguese colonies, Angola, Mozambique, and then southern Rhodesia, Botswana, today Bechuanaland, and southwest Africa, which we controlled. But the moment the two Portuguese colonies fell in the 1970s and in 1980, Rhodesia, 1990, Southwest Africa, we just collapsed a few years later. So the same logic holds for you. The more the dominoes fall, if a country in Europe like France had to become Islamic, you know, that would be extremely negative for America too, because they will have more and more positions and territory that they control against our own white Christian Western civilization. Should we place our faith in these leaders? You know, first of all, there's Mr. de Klerk here. He's an absolutely hated man in South Africa today. I mean, the world press lauded him as a hero, as a great architect of the new South Africa and reconciliation between black and white. But his own people today abhor him totally. And in fact, our new black government bought a $1 million armor-plated Mercedes for him to protect him against his own people, because there were so many threats, apparently, to his life from people who felt that he'd betrayed them. Then there's Mrs. Merkel. I don't think we need to say too much about her. Mrs. Hillary Clinton, who depends on the black vote in the USA. Without the black vote, she probably would have lost against Bernie Sanders. So she's not a friend of white people by any stretch of the imagination. And whenever people say that we should emigrate from our own country, you know, I wonder sometimes whether we're not going from the frying pan into the fire, because we may find that Mrs. Clinton or Mrs. Merkel or whomever will do a kind of a de Klerk to us in our new adopted country, and we'll end up in exactly the same position as we are in at the moment. This is a little photo that I got on the internet, and which is very touching. It's actually a group of Afrikaner children of kindergarten age, and they're learning our folk dances that we've practiced for hundreds of years. I did it when I was about 14 at high school. We had once a week these sessions with girls, and we dress in traditional dress, and we play music, and we do these folk dances. And they're learning it there today. This was from 2011. So our customs and culture and so on is still being transmitted from one generation to the next. I think Richard Spencer also referred to the struggle for our identity. And I think on that score, we are actually winning the battle in South Africa. We are fighting for our language, fighting for our customs, our identity, our culture, and so on. That's the first aspect of what we are up against. And then there's a security issue. You can go on Okay, this is another photo showing the Volksspiele. This is from 1952. 3,000 people participated in this folk dance down in Cape Town. Now today something like that wouldn't happen, but we have, we can look back at the past when our people were really motivated to live out their own culture like they did in this photograph here. There was also a commemorative stamp for Volksspiele, as we call it, folk dances at the time. So what can be done? I mean, we are confronted with with a number of serious problems, but the first one is physical security. We are being attacked all the time. You can go onto the internet and Google farm murders, and you'll find a whole lot of very gruesome photographs of people who have been killed, murdered, raped, tortured to death, horrible things that have happened over the last few years in South Africa. And there's been a response to that by means of private security companies, neighborhood watchers, farm watchers, and people are buying guns all the time, and they are getting prepared. But we need something more strategic, like a community security company that will be run and managed by whites and probably staffed by whites, so that if the worst comes to the worst, we at least have something to defend us. And then we need economic security. That's a major issue. On Facebook, not so long ago, somebody said there was a job as a chauffeur available for a white person. And I'm not lying, within a few hours, 100 people had applied for that job on Facebook, showing you that there's such a need for employment amongst white people who are being marginalized through affirmative action and all these other grandiose schemes by our government. I mean, they actually force the companies to maintain racial quotas in employment and so on. So there's a great need for new jobs among white South Africans. There's my book that's available here. And in the book, I talk about this artificial new identity that they have created in South Africa, a multicultural identity. And they use aspects of the old British Empire for that, and to create what I call a denationalized, globalized, and kitsch identity. And the advertising industry played an important role in creating this new identity in South Africa. Another example of a kind of a small business is this farming family. They're exporting grapes to China and Japan. I myself had the opportunity to visit a place where they do a lot of exports of fruit and so on to Europe. So there's a lot of things that we can do. What else can we, there are all sorts of sectors of the economy where we can play a role in tourism, IT and web design, medical, accounting. South Africa was voted as the #1 country for financial reporting of listed companies, because we probably have the best accountants in the world. We've got extremely stringent standards and and the level at University of Education and the board exams, very difficult. So that's something that we can do. And a lot of them, of course, have gone to Australia and other places where they are still practicing as accountants. Anything high-tech in South Africa is also good for white employment. We got a contract from Europe and the USA to build the largest radio telescope in the world, and that created, in the Karoo Desert, and that created a lot of jobs for white people. I'm just showing one example of a successful businessman in South Africa. He started a new bank a few years ago. In fact, the costs for the customer is so low, it's equivalent to 30 US cents per month for banking with this bank, and the rest of the services are all free. He was actually fired at the age of 48, and he had to start a new business. And he had a brokerage for a few years, and then he started this new bank, and this is the share price, how it's done over the last 2 years or so. And the title of his autobiography is, "And Then They Fired Me." Now, we've been fired from government and everywhere in South Africa. From most jobs, we have been fired by the new lot that took over, but it's not the end of the world. We can bounce back, like this man did. So, I think I've been mentioning it here and there to people at the conference. I think there's a great need for a kind of a worldwide ethnic business network for pro-white people, where we can invest in each other's businesses and we can create jobs in various countries. Also in Europe, there's a huge youth unemployment problem. And the internet has made, physical proximity almost irrelevant. We can communicate at almost zero cost with one another, and it both regarding human relationships and economic exchange, it just facilitates it to an astonishing extent. Yeah, this is a picture of the people who conquered us. I think they're a bunch of clowns. I mean, this is the famous Nelson Mandela. They built a statue for him next to the British Parliament. They've erected statues all over South Africa for him. That's his wife, Winnie, or his ex-wife. She killed a child of 12 years old. But the state never pressed charges against her. She's a murderer, okay? She ran a group of thugs, which she called a soccer team, and they murdered several people, in fact. And this man, he wasn't even born in South Africa. His name was Joe Slovo. He came to South Africa at the age of 10 from Lithuania. His name is Joe Slovo. There's now a road renamed after him in Johannesburg, and it really irritates me every time when I see it. And the West preferred these people to us who fought with them in 2 world wars. They preferred them to us. So we were also betrayed by our brothers and sisters in the Western countries. So what's really motivating me in my dream is that we should take back our country sometime in the future. There's going to be a huge crisis in South Africa sooner or later, and we must prepare ourselves for that, and eventually we must take it back, perhaps not all of it, but at least those parts that matter. And, we must hoist our orange, white, and blue flag again. That's the old Dutch flag that was first hoisted in 1572 when the first Dutch town was liberated from the Spanish Empire. In fact, Martin Bosma and I from the Dutch Freedom Party, we sort of have a bit of a rivalry going on who's going to hoist that flag first in one of our countries. He also wants it back for Holland. So we were talking about the dead canary. The canary is not dead, and he's working. And, as I was walking towards this hall, another very famous line from American literature by Dylan Thomas sprung to mind. Don't go gently into that good night. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. And we are the light of Africa, and it must stay that way. Thank you very much. Jared has mentioned that we've got about 5 minutes of question time, so I'd be happy to take any questions.
Oh, sure. Oh, it's working. Excellent. I had a question about a country you had referred to earlier and how it related to South Africa. Rhodesia. I was curious as to, I've never really, when I've looked, I really haven't found any information that's really satisfied, like give me a clear answer. What was the main reason why South Africa didn't even militarily back Rhodesia back when, as you mentioned, when the Portuguese colonies, Mozambique, and Angola fell? Why did and I guess the British and Americans, of course, put pressure on Rhodesia, of course, with more sanctions, but did they pressure South Africa super heavily? Is
yes.
that what stopped them, or was the Afrikaner rivalry with the English Rhodesians? Or?
No, I mean, definitely, it wasn't due to Afrikaner-English rivalry. And in our old army, I mean, there was such a good relationship among the two language communities within the army, and they each fought together, they ate together, fought together, and there was absolutely no division there. In fact, it's part of this, what I would call the Great Betrayal. In fact, Britain first put pressure on us because we had our police force. We had a police unit stationed in Rhodesia, and in 1973, the then Prime Minister of South Africa, B.J. Vorster, he swore that South Africa will never leave Rhodesia and never pull out this police unit that were fighting for the Rhodesians. But at the end of that year, he buckled under British pressure and he pulled those people back. And there was one British diplomat. In fact, afterwards, he was after devastating both Rhodesia and South Africa, he was rewarded with the post of ambassador here in Washington. His name, he was also made a baron of the British Empire. His name is Baron Robin Rennick. And he worked in cahoots with Joe Slovo and some other people. They first devised this plan to bring Rhodesia completely under radical Marxist rule. That was in 1979 at the Lancaster House, so-called summit. And then he did the same thing in South Africa. So it wasn't us. It was definitely Britain and this one man who played a major role in laying Rhodesia low. And our government was naive enough to think if they succumbed to Western pressure on Rhodesia, they would be left alone. Of course, they weren't.
I was involved in conservative journalism in the U.S. In the 70s and 80s. And at that time, there was all kinds of sort of plan Bs that were being talked about vis-a-vis South Africa. And maybe the whites would fall back on the Western Cape, or maybe Natal would be split off. Well, the one thing that they said they would never do is go to one man, one vote in the unitary state. Well, that's exactly what they did. Now, what happened here? What happened to all these plan Bs, these other ideas?
Well, you know, of Mr. P.W. Botha, who was Prime Minister until 1989, he was stabbed in the back by both Mr. de Klerk and a whole group in the cabinet. And he would never have acceded to this, but de Klerk didn't have a plan B at all. And apparently he was so megalomaniac that he thought that the blacks would actually vote for him. And he thought that, you know, we'd have the election and I'd still be in power and that would be the end of it. So he didn't really worry much about a plan B or anything like that at all. He was simply very naive, and there was this euphoria created by the Western media, and as a result of that, and some people in the military who were being pressured to actually do something, they also lacked the courage to actually make a stand somewhere. And our General Constant Viljoen, who was the previous head of the army, he is even today considered a traitor because he didn't do something to stop it. That's no.
Well, that was an interesting 40 minutes. My goodness, it's amazing how quickly that all passes. Of course, we couldn't show you the videos or the images that he was putting up there. Those are not the images that I put up for the Radio Free South Africa feed. That if you are listening to this, you can probably see those. But yeah, I also should reiterate that I am Gertjan Zwiggelaar. I am not the regular host of this program, Radio Free South Africa. Unfortunately, your regular host, Karin Smith, is engaged in some unfortunate family business, which has taken a considerable amount of her time, and she may also be relying on me next week. That may be possible. Although I sure hope and pray that things go well for her and her family. I was closely listening to one of the ads that I played earlier, and again, I don't really know what's on all these ads because I have no way to play them before the show goes up. And you know, it's really interesting. But there was an ad for a school that professes to be a Judeo-Christian establishment. And again, I should tell you that my opinions are not the opinions of Radio Free South Africa or indeed the network, Resolution RDO Network or blogtalkradio.com. These are my own personal opinions, and I find it kind of odd to put the word Judeo before Christian when, that's kind of like saying oil and water can mix. It's just like an oxymoron. Like, it just makes no sense, especially when you consider that the present day Judaics are, in belief anyway, the descendants of the Sadducees and Pharisees and those very people that pushed the Romans to crucify Jesus Christ. So, a Judeo-Christian, no, that doesn't jive right, and it is part of the problem that has led, I think, to some of the problems that we are facing today, is that we are so easily, or people in general, are so easily lying to themselves or not thinking things through very well, and just sort of take everything, because some authority said this is the way it is. You are part of a Judeo-Christian tradition. The Judeo tradition, if you actually take a look at that, the history of Christianity in Western Europe, indeed the nations of we white people, the white Christian nations, throughout history, when the people found out what in fact Jews believe and what they're up to, how they are like a worm in the apple barrel, trying to eat everything out from the inside out, destroying everything. Once people found that out, they kicked the Jews out of their country. In fact, relatively recently, Jews were booted out of a village in Guatemala by, a village of indigenous Guatemalans. And they woke up and said, no, Jews are expelled from here. It's just the same as what National Socialist Germany was doing. They were not, doing what the Jews claim, but they were certainly trying to expel them. And in fact, negotiations had been put into effect, making it possible for a portion of Uganda or possibly Madagascar to become the homeland for the Judaics, who 99% of whom don't even originate in Palestine, so their claim to that region is bogus. Their only real claim to any region is what is modern-day Ukraine, southwestern Russia, Kazakhstan, and Uzbekistan. I mean, that's what Khazaria was till it disbanded in about the 12th century or so. But at any rate, I just think it's just a weird, and especially since we have these other advertisements that are available for me to play, and so I'm going to play you this one.
It's obvious that the American people are fed up with the current so-called two-party system.
Democrats and Republicans have no idea what they're doing.
Our country is at stake. It's going to turn out to the point where it's going to be a revolution of laws and not political patronage.
Democratic socialism might seem like the newest cool thing on the street, but it's really not.
They will mix and match all their own agendas, and they'll add to that. Then they'll record it down.
We don't play these games.
It's time to get off of the fence, people. If you're not active, if you've been not a member of any type of organization, you've been wondering where to join or if even to join and get involved, the time for thinking about it has long since come and gone.
To learn more about the National Socialist Movement, go to nsm88.org.
You are the front lines of the white race. The front lines, the vanguard. Like the men and women that died and shed blood at the Alamo. The front line. You men and women are the future of this nation. The defense, the vanguard, the blood, the loyalty. The white race is going to win in this country. If we are going to take back this nation, we have to stand in solidarity. And this is one step in the right direction. White power. White power!
To learn more about the National Socialist Movement, go to nsm88.org.
Indeed, go there. National Socialism, speaking of, I've done a lot of reading in my life. I live in a library. I've read a lot of history. I really love to read, true as much as I can find the truth in modern books, but I seek out old books, and I did mention one to you. Older books before political correctness grabbed a hold of everybody and created that madness. And of course we do know that all the publishing houses pretty much are controlled by the Judaic element, who continually insinuate their mythological narratives into the story, and people that don't know any better, and then only read perhaps one book pertaining to a particular topic, they don't really have much cross-referencing opportunities, but I do, and I don't mind saving you time. Those of you who haven't an opportunity to access books and take the time to read them, but that's my role. I mean, we all do our different tasks. We all do our noble work, and that's what makes everything go. And so we live together in community, and no one's work is more noble than another's. We all contribute. Somebody has to sweep a street, and somebody has to repair a broken heart. And so that's the way it is. And that kind of an approach to treating human beings with that kind of idea that what everyone does is noble, unless of course they're dealing crystal meth or something, or they're wreaking havoc on people's finances with usurious interest rates, or taxing people to death with schemes that aren't even legitimate. Income taxes, for example, that sort of thing. But in general, most people really do want to live well and happily with their neighbors. That is white people mostly. But there are people that, they look like human beings. But you got to realize that the human body is a paradigm. It's a design. It's a very efficient all-terrain vehicle. But inside that body type, that all-terrain vehicle, there can be all kinds of different spirits operating that mechanism, and in some cases those spirits are malevolent ones. Demons, if you will, archon-infected beings. They could be shape-shifting reptilians, as David Icke identified in his massive, magnificent book, The Biggest Secret. If you haven't read it, I'd highly recommend that. I highly recommend grabbing important books, ladies and gentlemen. Read, and try and find old books too. But anyway, so we have all these different types of beings essentially manifesting within a human-looking body, walking about. And one small, tiny percentage of that group is considered to be Jewish. And then when you look at the way that the Judaic element operates internationally, and when you read the kind of information that has come to light, has been available for some time. I mean, it's no wonder that one of the three stooges of Jewish intellectualism manifested amongst the Jews, being Sigismund Freud, who realized that, holy smokes, my people are nuts. My people are like absolutely crazy as Mad Hatters. What is all of that? So that's when, psychiatry evolved, and it's now identified that the Jews exhibit well over 200 identifiable psychopathies, and not the least of which is schizophrenia, and manifestations of schizophrenia are multiple personality disorder and extreme paranoia. And so we do know that the Jews are extremely paranoid. They think everyone's out to get them, but of course with good reason. I mean, once the Goyim That's what the word they use for us who are not members of their belief system. The word means animals in human skin. When we Gentiles wake up in any kind of critical mass, they know, the Judaic element knows that they will be in big trouble because they've been practicing some horrible things against Gentiles and are in fact involved overtly with the extermination of the white race. Genociding white people is on the agenda in South Africa. Indeed, it is an official song, it seems like, the Kill Whitey, Kill the Boer song that's openly sung by the president and leadership of the federal government in South Africa and of the ANC government there. And the word bulala, that means killing whitey. You know, that's a word that is openly spoken there, and nobody is taken to task for that. Nobody is saying, hey, wait a minute, that's overt racism, and you can't get away with that. But you know, the rules are different for white people, just as the rules, say, in courts are different for Judaic elements. A local pedophile Jew businessman here didn't even bother to show up in court for 2.5 years, charged with molesting a couple of young boys in his care. And when he did finally show up in court, you know, he gets a little slap on the wrist and, oh, you've been a naughty boy. And yeah. Well, that's pretty much how it is. I'm even suspicious that the Judaic element doesn't pay income taxes. I have a suspicion of that because I do know that in Canada, the Canada Revenue Agency, just like the IRS in the United States, the Internal Revenue Service, that those agencies are privately controlled Rothschild establishments and have no legitimate claim on our property whatsoever. The thing is a gigantic Jewish fraud. And it has to be investigated, and I don't think it's really all that much different in other Western nations. The people are being ripped off left, right, and center, and the tax burden is certainly one of the most onerous burdens that people are carrying to support governments that are increasingly Marxified and controlled by the Judaic element. And certainly they are behind the shenanigans and malfeasance of the ANC. The Negroes they're very easily controlled puppets, since the average intelligence quotient of an African Negro is around 75 in about the 75th, 80 percentile range. In North America, the average is around 85. So the Negro scoring around the 85th percentile range, but that's because of the miscegenation that occurred there when the Jewish slave traders, crossbred Irish, and of course their own. The Jewish slave traders owned the ships and operated them. The sailors and the administrative staff of those slave trading ships, those were all Jews, and of course they're not known for their morals, and so they definitely introduced a lot of their psychopathies into the the genetic makeup of the North American Negroes. So they got Irish, which are the good part that they got, and that accounts for some of the smarter ones. But the psychopathic aspects that they got from the Jews, that is certainly evident as well. And, of course, the moment there is any kind of a problem, right away Negroes have to go rescue the Nike Airs from the local, sportswear shop and, that sort of thing. So that's pretty weird psychopathic behavior. Anyway, enough of that. It's all so depressing. Let's go to something that's not depressing. We do have time for this. And this is some of my music. This is called Music is So Awesome. Yeah, that was made in 2016. I think I composed that around November 2016. Yeah, something so awesome about music. Music is so awesome. Yeah, that was played by the Amsterdammers Pro Harmonic Orchestra. Yeah, and well, I won't list all the players. There is only one, and that's me. But I have a long name, Gertjan Zwiggelaar. As I was listening to that, it just occurred to me that I kind of left a thought hanging when we were talking about National Socialism, and then I started talking about my library and all of that, blah, blah, blah. The point I was trying to get to was that I had come to exactly the same conclusions about the international Judaic element as Adolf Hitler had come to in his amazing book Mein Kampf. I read Mein Kampf now probably about 5 years ago or so, but prior to that I had read copious amounts of books on all kinds of history subjects. In fact, I've got on my shelves essentially the history of all the peoples of the planet, right, going back to the Hittites and Sumerians and the Babylonians and the Egyptians and and so on. But yeah, I came to the same conclusions about the Judaics. Lots of famous people have in fact come to conclusions about them. They who profess to be the indigenous people of Palestine, which of course is absolute nonsense, and how anybody could have bought into, some guy named Balfour writing a letter to Lord Rothschild, for Pete's sake, saying, okay, go ahead, so you can steal Palestine away. Yeah, well, anyway, the removal of the indigenous people of Palestine is kind of what I'm seeing unfolding in South Africa, because the indigenous people of South Africa are, first of all, the Khoi, and the San, who are known as the Bushmen, and they've never really progressed beyond being Bushmen. They prefer that lifestyle, and what's wrong with that? Who's to say that they have to live in towns or cities? They like roaming about in the Kalahari, which is a very interesting place and has a very interesting geological history, because apparently under those sands is evidence of a huge, highly organized, highly complex irrigation system. And so at one time, what is now the Kalahari Desert was likely a green zone with abundant verdure and hugely successful farming enterprises, judging from the scale of the systems that are evident from the kind of technologies where satellites fly over and they can make photographs of what's below the surface. Yeah, and so anyway, getting back to National Socialism, that's the political system as was espoused by Adolf Hitler in Mein Kampf, and, the brilliant philosophers that he had surrounding him. It really is a very viable political system, and it has been the only one that's proven itself to be of any worth to us. Unless, of course, we go back, some time into the time of the Antonines. There was a 200-year period from the end of the first sort of into the second century there in Rome, that the Antonine line actually finished with the brilliant and famous, you guys all know likely who Marcus Aurelius was, the general, brilliant general and Emperor Marcus Aurelius, a Stoic philosopher, who, when you read his meditations, you think you're reading, the text of a Christian writer, very much so. And indeed, it is very obvious that Jesus was aware of the Stoics and what they believed, as he was certainly aware of the writings of Plato and Aristotle, and yes, of course. He was brilliant, and he certainly fed that brilliance with knowledge, and he was well known to visit libraries whenever he had the opportunity, and he certainly is known to have sat in council with rabbis and questioned them with very probing questions that challenged the belief systems, which when you actually think about it, the things that people believe, some of it is pretty strange. And one of those belief systems that are very, very strange is, of course, the Judaic belief system based on the Talmud that teaches that the law for the Jew is he must lie, cheat, steal, and kill Goyim, and that a girl Goy is filthy after the age of 3, and a boy Goy is filthy after the age of 9, and of course things can be done to them, and it's just really terrible. And when you think about it, the teachings of the Talmud, and then you reflect upon what is revealed in the Quran, and you start to think, there's a lot of similarity there, and indeed there are similarities. The Muslim thinks that anybody who is a non-believer, somebody who doesn't go on their knees 5 times a day in supplication before this entity called Allah, is a kafir and should be tortured and killed. In fact, almost every page of the Quran is about punishment for unbelievers, the woeful scourge and hellfire, and how we should all be consumed in pavilions of flames, and when our skin is completely consumed, Allah will give us new skin and burn us some more. That sort of stuff. That's in the Quran a lot. You can read about that all. I did actually read the Quran a number of times in preparation for a book called The Horror, an in-depth look into the Quran. You can get that on my website, or from my website, stratofericus.com, or you can go to gertjan.ca. It takes you straight to stratofericus.com. The information's all there. You can also access information pertaining to it on the Rents.com website, Jeff Rentz's website, Rents.com, and it's prominently advertised there in a red rectangle underneath the Muslim section on the front page there, and it's revealed as an important book, so you might want to praise yourself of that. I also host my own radio show, which is Radio Free Stratofericus, and that is on the same network, blogtalkradio.com or the resolutionrdonetwork.com. You can access Radio Free Stratofericus, and that's every Friday night at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. Yes, and so I'm very grateful for Karin Smith to give me this opportunity to host her program. If you're not aware, I'll share something with you. I'm very proud of my friend Karin, because Karin is the recipient of a very prestigious award for her radio show. And so her radio show was obviously monitored all through last year, 2016, and it became apparent that her show was popular, and that she was in fact doing a very, very awesome job, and therefore she was awarded the prize as the top broadcaster of talk show radio and blog talk and Resolution RDO Network. So congratulations for that, Karin. We have just over 5 minutes left, and it might be nice just to kind of finish off with something. Since South Africa is sitting on the sea, as it were, I'll play one of my poems about a mermaid.
to me on a million charging horses. A mermaid or a dream? I caught the flash of her hair, which was golden, as she lay there so silently. The wind it howled and the waves were crashing. Shock waves of terror filled my soul. The sky was dark and the clouds tumultuous as the wind howled ominously. An angel lay in the sand before me, washed ashore in that stormy sea from a ship which smashed up over yonder because the light they could not see. Oh, sweet angel, do not die before me. Let me breathe the life back into thee. Die not here, or not forever. Do not return to that horrible sea. She coughed once, twice, and started breathing. My sanguine heart raced violently. I covered her in my old sou'wester and carried her home to the blazing tree. Over time, she had gotten better. She smiled again on day 3. Her eyes were like the raging ocean. Her thanks were salty like the sea. So deeply we swam in love's warm waters. My mind had reeled deliriously. She became my sweet and joyous lover, my golden mermaid from the sea. My golden mermaid, she came to me. She came to me. Okay, a few final words before we close the show. Ladies and gentlemen, people in South Africa are in dire need of financing, so you can donate to Radio Free South Africa's website in order to help the people of South Africa and to help Lee Dupré there with her charity, with her work helping the plight of the white people who are living in dire circumstances in squatter camps in the land built by their ancestors. How terribly horrible that is. So please, money, and not that that's everything, but it certainly helps an awful lot because people there are literally starving and they are in need of medicines and all the kind of help, the children. Oh, it's awful, the plight of the white people there. So anyway, this is Gertjan Zwiggelaar signing off for Radio Free South Africa. Good night.